And the idea for them then is that somehow, if we were going to be actually aware of reality and not through this interpretation, we would have to not have any interpretations at all, that somehow reality would just have to stamp itself on our minds without any intermediary actions. Or what they will then do is to say, I can choose to prioritize this, right, over that in my visual field. They will say, and they're right to say this, that's a value judgment. I think this is more important now, and this is more important over that. But then by the time they start using the words values, they're coming out of very sophisticated negative evaluative theories that say values are just subjective and have nothing to do with any sort of external reality. Well, maybe it's worse than that. So for both of them, it's on the cognition side and on the evaluative side that they're deep into subjective territory, and so those then become negative words for them. Instead, I think, and this is my only hope as a philosopher, I think philosophers have a very small part of this project, just attending to the language that we're using at the foundations of cognition, right? There's all of these metaphors of screens and filters and tabernacles and visual fields and so on. That's where we have to get that sorted out, because if we don't get those foundations correct, then we're going to be messed up. But come back.
Well, so two things there. You pointed to the fact that the postmodernist description of the subjective, but tell me what you think about this. See, the postmodern insistence, despite the fact that they claim that there's no uniting meta-narrative, which is a specious claim in my estimation, because I don't know where the uniting ends. If everything's a narrative, there's uniting narratives at every level of analysis. But more than that, their proposition, at least implicitly, has been that the narratives that we do utilize are predicated on power. That's part of the reflection of the subjective. It's like, I'm prioritizing in keeping with my desire to exercise power. And by power, I don't mean ability to maneuver in the world. I mean force and compulsion. And that what we have in the postmodern world is a battleground between different claims of power, and that's all there is. I think the weakness in that, first, one weakness is that it's a confession rather than a description. But the other one is that power games are not iterable and productive and improving across time. They're self-defeating. And so you can play a power game and you can win short-term victories with a power game, but it's not a sustainable, iterable, medium to long-term viable strategy. You know that Frans de Waal, for example, the primatologist, studied chimpanzees. So, we have this trope, and I think it's a consequence of Marxist influence on biologists, that the hierarchies of chimpanzees, for example, which are masculine hierarchies in the main, are predicated on power. The alpha chimp is the most powerful tyrant and he dominates all the others. And that's why he's reproductively successful. De Waal showed very clearly that there are alphas who use power, but they have short reigns, fractious communities, and they're extremely likely to suffer a premature violent death, right? So it is a niche in that you can force compliance, but the stable alphas that de Waal studied were the most reciprocal male chimpanzees of the troop.
Right.
They made the most lasting friendships. And so that's a whole different model of the mediation of attention, let's say, than one that's predicated on power. So do you think it's fair when you're assessing the postmodern corpus, philosophical corpus? You talked about the subjective element. Where do you think the postmodern claim that power is essentially the dominant narrative, where do you think that fits in with this claim with regards to subjectivity?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. I think the postmodern use of the word power is another example of turning a virtue into a vice. I think power properly conceived could be coextensive with our ability to get stuff done. Right? And our cognitive powers, right, if we have a good, healthy epistemology, right, should be augmented to enable us to survive and flourish better in the world.
Even cooperatively.
That's exactly right. But then if you, however, are skeptical, if you do start with the epistemology, all of the postmoderns do come out of an epistemological training. It's a striking fact, the big name postmoderns. So we mentioned Derrida, Lyotard, Foucault, Rorty, right, and the others, they are all PhDs in philosophy. They're all doing heavy-duty work in epistemology at their graduate and doctoral level work. And that does come to become the foundation. And because of the time that they are working in, middle part of the 20th century was an extraordinarily skeptical phase for philosophy. The prevailing theories and paradigms that everyone had been excited about had collapsed at that time. So they came of age. Now, what that then is to say is, if you don't think, right, that human beings can know the world as individuals, right, then you don't think of developing your reason, developing your capacity for logic, for rationality, for understanding is the most important thing about human beings. So what then is it to be a human being? And to the extent that you devalue the human cognitive apparatus, then we are going to become closer to chimps. And then the social models that are prevalent about how we think chimps are going to operate in the world are going to become more predominant, or even lower than chimps, baboons.
Yeah.
Who are even less.
It's more of a baboon model.
Yeah, it might then be. But
fractious fascists.
So I think this, though, shows the absolute importance, though, of these cognitive issues that the psychologists and the philosophers are trying to work out positively. Because to the extent that we can show that we have cognition, that it is efficacious, that it is competent, that our brain, mind is an enormously powerful tool, and if we learn to use it well, we will survive and flourish better as individuals, and socially we'll start to work out the win-win positive sum social things. Otherwise, we will sort of regress socially and evolutionary to chimp and baboon kinds of levels. Now, the other thing,
that regression becomes the use of power as the meta-narrative that the postmodernists hypothetically abandoned.
That's right. They're all left with it. So
that's what they're left with.
You're getting rid of human cognitive power as a positive thing. Then you ask, well, what's left? If it's not the case that I think my human cognition, my mind, puts me in touch with reality, and that I can work out reality, and that your cognition puts you in touch with reality. And of course, maybe we're initially focusing on things, we have different frameworks, but that we nonetheless have the cognitive tools to talk about these things, to do the experiments, I can visit you, what you've experienced.
To take each other's position.
That's right.
In service of some higher goal.
That's right. And that we can work all of these things out to, in effect, have an agreed upon understanding of the nature of reality. Then, if that's not what's going on, that cognition is about trying to use our minds to understand reality starts to drop out of the picture. And what the postmoderns then do is either say, well, I make up my own reality. That's what's going on here. Or some of them are more passive, all of the influences of more environmental deterministic understandings of human beings. What we call learning and cognition is just being conditioned by your environment or your social upbringing, right, and so on. So again, we don't have an autonomous...
The dominant patriarchy.
Yeah, or there could be any sort of social structure from their perspective. But that then means that what we are interested in is primarily social relationships. It's not me in relation to reality, and other people are part of reality, so I have to work that out. But rather, the assumption is that I am inextricably molded by and shaped by my social reality. And so the dynamic between us socially is the thing that comes to be. And the word there that becomes most important is the power word. It's a kind of social power. So
that tilts them towards that social constructionism.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Well, yeah, it's the social construction theory that leads them to have that social understanding of power. But the power for them cannot be the positive sum kind of power that we're talking about, because that understanding of positive sum power depends on we can figure out the way the world works and do science and technology and make the world a better place and empower ourselves. We can learn better nutrition to make our bodies more powerful. I can understand that you're a rational person, and you can understand that I'm a rational person, so I have to treat you a certain way conversationally, socially, and so forth. So all of the positive sum social stuff is going to come out of that, but the postmoderns have cut all of that away. All you're left with is beings that are conditioned and trying to recondition each other in a social world that is totally social world. And what they then call power just is the influence or tools, including the tools of language, that are now understood as to have nothing to do with the nature of reality, but as being socially constructed themselves.
And tools of power.
That's right. And so it becomes then necessarily a zero-sum, socially influencing and controlling game. And they reinterpret everything in terms of that.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. So I think what we'll do is stop there. We've come to the end of the time for the YouTube section. I'd like to continue this discussion on the Daily Wire side, but what I would like to talk about with you there is power in service of what?
Yeah.
Right? Because there has to be, unless you could hypothesize that power in itself is a desirable good, but then you have to define power in a way that would make the desirability of it self-evident. Alternatively, you have to say that you want power for a reason. So I want to talk to you about that and get your thoughts on that.
That can take us back to the Peterson Academy courses too.
Okay. Yeah. Well, maybe we could close with that too. You've taped 3 additional courses.
I've done 5 courses.
Yeah.
Yes.